They were pouring champagne in the conference room while Marcus was crawling under a desk fixing a permissions bug in a system they couldn't even name without his code. That's how far the gap had grown. The boardroom laughed, clinked glasses, and toasted to a future that sat on his architecture like a mansion on a buried time bomb. I watched him from the corridor that day, calm, focused, invisible. Not one of them looked his way, but I did. I always did. Marcus Wolf wasn't just the quiet engine of this company, he was the damn machine. You ever see a man who could write a data parser in his head while replacing a failed drive on a live system without breaking a sweat? That was Marcus. No ego, no theatrics, just absolute control over everything beneath the surface. And they hated him for it. Not openly, not yet. But in the little ways, the way they stopped CCing him on strategy emails, the way the new hires from Stanford called him old school behind his back. They didn't know the fire they were playing with. Before we go deeper, real quick, if you're listening to this, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and like the video. It helps way more than you think and keeps stories like this coming. See, 5 years ago, when the company was still duct tape and dream pitches, Marcus started sketching a framework that could stitch together legacy infrastructure with modern APIs. A Frankenstein miracle of backward compatibility and forward resilience. He didn't pitch it like a visionary. He just built it, and it worked. Our entire product line today, literally every handshake between client systems, every encrypted tunnel, every live sync process, runs on that backbone. But Marcus didn't ask for credit. He didn't want his face on the founding visionaries webpage. He was too busy writing resilience protocols and filing provisional patents under the company's IP strategy. His name buried under piles of legalese. But it was there. Every one of those filings listed him as originating author. Not that Brent Walsh cared. The acquisition was supposed to be the big leap. $500 million. We'd been prepping for it for months, polishing documentation, staging system demos, running internal audits to make sure nothing would spook the buyers. Marcus was looped in early, mostly for technical overviews. Then Brent showed up. Brent Walsh, 35, Rolex tan, and the kind of MBA confidence that smells like Aqua di Gio and ignorance. The new VP of Strategic Ops, poached from some mid-tier competitor to streamline the final stages of transition. He shook everyone's hand like a campaign donor and started slashing unnecessary personnel from the call lists. Marcus was the first to go, not because he was weak, because Brent didn't like question marks. And Marcus didn't talk in slogans. He told Marcus to his face that deal mechanics were above his pay grade. The words came with a smile, but the door behind them was real. Marcus couldn't log into the deal room the next morning. His access revoked, credentials scrubbed. I remember him sitting at his desk, shoulders still, eyes blank for a long beat. Then he opened an old leather-bound folder he kept in the second drawer. Thick, yellowing pages, printouts from the early days, legal filings, signatures, highlighted clauses. That was the moment everything shifted, but nobody knew it yet. Because Marcus Wolf doesn't raise his voice, he just flips switches. Brent made his first impression the way a dog marks a tree, loud, territorial, and with absolutely no sense of the soil he was pissing on. He swaggered into the Monday morning senior ops meeting 10 minutes late, dripping entitlement like it was cologne, and immediately started redefining responsibilities. That was his phrase, not mine. Redefining. What he meant was cutting anyone who didn't fit into the brochure he'd already printed in his head. People like Marcus. People who didn't speak in buzzwords or run their mouths on LinkedIn about agile synergies. I sat 2 chairs down, watching it unfold like a slow-motion demolition. Brent clicked through his slide deck like it was gospel, and on slide 8, right next to a stock photo of a diverse high five, he casually announced the new deal team roster. Marcus's name wasn't on it. Not even as a technical advisor. The man who'd built the product they were about to sell for nearly $500 million had been cut out of the final chapter. I glanced at Marcus. No reaction, just a blink. Like his brain had already filed the insult into some mental cold storage. But I knew better. His stillness was never apathy. It was the exact opposite. He was listening, logging, calculating. Later that afternoon, I passed by his desk on the way to a compliance check-in. He was typing something, slow, deliberate, not code, Legalese, drafting language, old filings. He didn't look up when I paused. "Did you know?" I asked. His fingers stopped for half a beat. "I knew the day they hired him," he said quietly, "that someone would try to monetize what they didn't understand." He didn't say it bitterly. No venom, just math. The next morning, the moment everything snapped into focus came like a glitch in the matrix. Marcus tried to log into the secure data room, standard procedure for our engineering leadership during a sale this size, and was hit with a red banner. Access revoked. No explanation, no notification, just a lockout. He stared at the screen for maybe 10 seconds. Then, like clockwork, Brent appeared behind him with a fresh coffee and that smirk he wore like a third chin. "Yeah, we cleaned up some permissions," Brent said, clapping Marcus on the back like they were friends. "This stuff's above your pay grade now. Don't worry. We'll holler if we need something debugged." Debugged. The man who authored the middleware stack was being spoken to like a Geek Squad trainee, and he just nodded. Not a word, not a blink. Just a long, quiet look at the man who thought he'd won something. Then Marcus stood up, walked to his office, and closed the door. I watched Brent strut away like a man who'd just house-trained a wolf. He didn't see the door Marcus closed as anything more than polite resignation. But I did. I knew that door wasn't just closing. It was sealing. Because when Marcus Wolf goes silent, it's not surrender. It's the click of a safety being released. The folder wasn't much to look at. Just a battered manila thing tucked inside a fireproof drawer, third from the bottom in Marcus's filing cabinet. No labels, no tabs, just dog-eared corners and the faint smell of old toner. I watched him pull it out with the same quiet reverence some men reserve for pulling the tarp off a classic car. He set it on the desk, sat down, and flipped it open like a priest opening scripture. 3 years ago, we were still working out of that shoebox office above the UPS store, and Marcus had insisted that we bring in outside counsel before signing anything IP-related. "Not internal," he said. "I want it airtight." I remember thinking he was paranoid at the time. I was wrong. He wasn't paranoid. He was playing chess with the ghosts of future incompetence. And now, here they were, wearing tailored blazers and locking him out of his own creation. I leaned in just enough to see the clause. Page 9, paragraph 6. Not highlighted, not bolded, just tucked in between 2 lines about codebase, provenance, and derivative works. In the event of a partial tie or full corporate acquisition involving IP-bearing products authored by the undersigned, the acquirer shall be notified no less than 72 hours in advance via formal license disclosure. All rights held under provisional or non-provisional patent applications remain with the original author unless explicitly transferred with written consent. I let out a slow breath. Is that enforceable? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He flipped the page, found the signature line, his, dated, witnessed, notarized. Then he opened a different drawer, pulled out a card, and dialed the number like he was ordering coffee. No hesitation. "Jeff? Wolf. I'm invoking the trigger clause. Yes, Section 6, page 9, full asset review. We've got a live transaction within 72. I need the formal license notice issued to both parties and time-stamped." Pause. His voice didn't rise. "I'll email the product list. Anything with my integration shell qualifies." Another pause. No escalation. Just paperwork. Let the clock start ticking." He hung up. That was it. No drama, no speeches, no shouting in the boardroom or slamming of laptops. Just Marcus, a clause, and a phone call, like flipping a hidden switch that nobody remembered was wired to the main power. The beauty of it wasn't in the confrontation. It was in the design. He hadn't built a trap. He just followed the rules they all forgot they signed. They thought he was irrelevant. They thought he was too technical. What they didn't realize was that the more technical you are, the deeper you plant the landmines. Not out of spite, out of necessity. That license clause? It wasn't even hidden. It was just ignored, buried under layers of quarterly reports and acquisition hunger. Marcus stood, smoothed out his shirt, and looked at the wall like he could see through it. Maybe he could. "They'll think I'm retaliating," he said quietly, almost to himself. I tilted my head. "Aren't you?" He gave the smallest shake of his head. "No, I'm protecting the architecture." And somehow, that was scarier than if he'd been angry, because anger fades, but precision, that stays. It hit the inboxes at 12:03 p.m. on a Tuesday. The licensing notice wasn't flashy. No bold fonts, no threats, just 6 clean pages with black and white language, 2 exhibit attachments, and the signatures of Marcus Wolf and his attorney, time-stamped, watermarked, and quietly lethal. Subject line, formal licensing disclosure. Wolf authored integration stack, IP-bearing asset notification. It went to internal legal, the acquirer's compliance office, and, most importantly, the deal liaison copied on all the asset transfer agreements. 3 hours before close. That's all it took to turn celebration into silence. I was on the 2nd floor when it hit. First came the little noises, the missed keystrokes, the dead air on Slack, the subtle shifting in chairs. Then someone said it out loud, like a curse. Hold the close, there's a conflict flag on the core IP. By 12:17, 2 members of our legal team were pacing in the hallway outside the boardroom, holding copies of the filing like it might bite them. One of them, Shari, our internal counsel, was on the phone with external advisors trying to decode what the clause meant for immediate transfer rights. She was using that tight, clipped voice lawyers use when they're both angry and impressed. By 12:29, the acquirer's legal team had looped in 3 more attorneys, one from London, one from DC, and a patent consultant I'd only ever seen on their most sensitive calls. I watched through the glass as someone from their side pushed a chair back and actually stood up. That never happens unless something's bleeding. Brent barged into the room like he was kicking down a saloon door. Can someone explain why we're taking IP cues from a guy who isn't even part of the transaction team? He barked. Shari didn't look up. Because the guy you locked out owns the license to the product we're selling, Brent. He waved it off. It's just paperwork. We'll get him to sign. That was Brent's fatal flaw, thinking paperwork was powerless. Thinking that the man who wrote the underlying system couldn't possibly have embedded legal controls just as precise as his code. He thought he was dealing with a grunt in khakis, not the architect of the platform standing between him and his golden parachute. You didn't review this clause? Shari asked flatly. It wasn't my department, Brent snapped. The clause says any sale involving the integration stack requires pre-sale notification and written license approval, said someone from the acquirer's team, their voice tinny through the speakerphone. There's no language about automatic transfer, no assignment clause, no override provision, which means, Shari cut in, we're not cleared to sell it, not without his signature. Brent's jaw clicked, and for the first time since he swaggered into our lives, he didn't have a comeback. His mouth opened, then closed again. I'd seen goldfish with better recovery. Marcus wasn't even in the room. He didn't need to be. He was 2 floors below, sipping coffee from a chipped mug and reading through an old engineering magazine like nothing was happening. I texted him. They're panicking. He replied, they should. That was it. No emojis, no exclamation points, just fact. I stepped into the hallway as Brent stormed out of the boardroom, red-faced and muttering about lawyer theatrics and overreacting to footnotes. He brushed past me without a word. Didn't even notice I was there. But I noticed everything. The shift, the silence, the invisible wire he'd tripped over, and the man who'd strung it years in advance. They thought Marcus Wolf was just the past. Turns out, he was the firewall. By 1:06 p.m., the buyer's team had escalated the call to what they called Level 0, the term they use when something could crater a deal mid-flight. Their lead counsel, a stern woman named Callie from the New York office, requested a full architectural review of the integration layer. Not the marketing overview, not the DevOps summary, the actual skeleton. They opened the codebase. Within 20 minutes, it was clear. The heart of the entire suite, the seamless interoperability they'd touted in every demo and investor pitch, was Marcus Wolf's integration shell. You couldn't remove it without killing the entire nervous system. And it wasn't abstract. His name was literally embedded in several initialization scripts, patent numbers referenced in module headers, and his unique error-trapping protocols were so specific they'd once won a quiet industry award we couldn't even legally advertise. Then came the second shoe. The license wasn't transferable. That part hit like a freight train. Clause 7C, no license shall be reassigned, sublicensed, or absorbed by proxy during an asset transfer without the written and dated consent of the original author. All derivative frameworks remain tethered to original license terms regardless of versioning. In layman's terms, you can't sell the engine if you don't have the keys. And Marcus never gave up the keys. Upstairs, Brent was spinning. He had a folder in one hand, his Bluetooth headset jammed in, barking into thin air like a man trying to put out a house fire with compliments. Yeah, we'll get him to sign something. It's a misunderstanding. I'll send over a quick NDA, wrap this up in half an hour. But he wouldn't. At 1:42 p.m., Marcus received Brent's email, an NDA so sloppily written it still had placeholder text in the footer, a generic acknowledgement of cooperation, along with a templated cover letter trying to guilt him into moving fast for the good of the company. Marcus didn't reply. He didn't even open the attachment. I know, because I saw the notification come in. He just stared at the subject line for a second, then clicked archive, and that's when I realized he wasn't playing hard to get. He was done. Not vengeful, not spiteful, just done. Like a man who had already packed his bags 3 years ago and left a note by the door for when the kids finally noticed. Brent sent another email at 2:07, then a text, then a Slack message that opened with, "Hey, buddy." Buddy. Marcus stood up, walked to the window, and took a slow sip from his mug. His shoulders didn't move. His jaw didn't tense. He wasn't stewing or savoring it. He was just beyond it all. Callie, the buyer's counsel, summarized the problem in one flat sentence. You're trying to acquire a product you don't legally control. That's when the boardroom went from stressed to still, the kind of still that happens when everyone in the room realizes the brakes were cut 5 miles back. There was no alternate path, no second shell, no rewrite real quick option. What Marcus had built wasn't replaceable. It was foundational. And worse, they had mocked the man holding the foundation like a landlord whose name they forgot to put on the lease. At 2:15, Brent knocked on Marcus's door. He didn't open it. He just left a manila envelope with a printed NDA on the desk and walked off. Marcus didn't move for a full minute. Then he picked up the envelope, flipped it over, and dropped it straight into the shred bin without opening it. Vindication doesn't always look like a victory lap. Sometimes it's the sound of a paper shredder and the silence that follows. The meltdown didn't begin with shouting. It began with a question spoken too calmly for Brent to see the blade beneath it. Did you review the IP continuity filings before initiating final transfer protocols? That was the board chair, Mr. Hanley, 72, white hair, and a voice like cold stone. Brent blinked. That wasn't my department. 5 words. That was all it took. Silence expanded across the boardroom like a spreading oil slick. Brent's hands hovered over his laptop like it could save him, fingers twitching uselessly on the trackpad as the legal team exchanged glances that weren't surprised, just resigned. Everyone in the room could smell it now, the stench of someone bluffing with a losing hand. One of the junior partners from legal broke first. You had edit permissions on the diligence folder, she said. You removed 2 flagged appendices from the legal packet dated 22 months ago. Brent turned red. They were outdated, legacy filings. The current counsel package didn't list anything actionable. Shari, our in-house legal bulldog, looked like she'd just been handed a live grenade and a court order to use it. They weren't outdated. They were red-flagged for review and specifically marked "Do not delete until countersigned." The buyer's lead counsel, Callie, leaned in across the conference table. Was there internal approval for those edits? Brent didn't answer. Because if not, she said, tapping her pen against the folder in front of her, this wasn't just oversight. This was material misrepresentation of ownership, and we're now in breach territory. Hanley didn't blink. Get me the deal clock. One of the assistants flipped the acquisition timer from a digital dashboard onto the screen. A live countdown, once meant to build excitement, now just a grim reminder. 2 hours, 7 minutes, and 39 seconds. I suggest we pause the transaction until full chain of title is reestablished, Callie said. Our team has already identified 2 core modules that are inseparably linked to Mr. Wolf's license. Unless that signature is obtained, the deal is non-viable. And then came the kill shot. The acquirer's senior counsel, a quiet man with gray temples and the kind of voice that turns subpoenas into lullabies, finally looked up from the stack of documents in front of him. "This wasn't negligence," he said. "It was sabotage, through omission." Brent jerked in his chair like he'd been tasered. "Sabotage? Are you serious? I've been steering this close for months." "No," Sherry said coolly. "You've been gutting compliance for months so you could take credit for a clean close, and you just steered the company into a brick wall." That was when the room stopped treating him like a VP and started treating him like a liability. Brent reached for his water but missed the glass. It tipped, spilled, rolled across the table toward the buyer's documentation. Nobody moved to help. The chair finally stood, slow and deliberate. Meeting adjourned until counsel confirms transferability. "Wait," Brent started, desperate. "Wait, we can fix this. Get Wolf in here, I'll talk to him." "You had your chance," Hanley said without turning around. Brent was still standing when the buyer's team unplugged their laptops and began filing out. Still mumbling defenses to no one in particular. Still hoping someone would hand him a rope. But Marcus wasn't coming. He was 3 floors below at the IT help desk, talking a junior tech through a routing issue that had nothing to do with any of this. Like the roof above wasn't currently collapsing. Because that's the thing about architects. They know exactly where the support beams are, and they never panic when someone else kicks them down. It started with a voicemail Marcus didn't check for 6 hours. He found it while clearing out system alerts in his inbox. Just a short, polite message from someone named Erin Langley, EVP of Mergers and Acquisitions on the buyer's side. Her tone was measured, respectful, not a hint of desperation, but the subtext was thick enough to bottle. "We know who you are now, and we're ready to talk." He forwarded it to his attorney and went back to rebuilding an internal config tool for our support team. Nothing urgent, nothing performative, just his usual rhythm. Calm, meticulous, unconcerned with the sound of Brent Walsh flailing above him like a drowning man screaming into a storm. When Erin finally got him on a live call the next morning, she didn't bother with the pitch. She didn't waste his time pretending the licensing notice hadn't sent shockwaves up through their entire acquisition chain. She got straight to it. "We're offering a new position, not with your current employer, with us. IP licensing lead reporting directly to our CTO. Custom terms. Your hours, your conditions." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That's interesting," he said. "Do you have a number?" She did, and it was good. 7 figures good. But Marcus didn't blink. He asked about veto rights, oversight access, and the clause in the buyer's own bylaws that would let him limit third-party derivative usage. Erin didn't flinch. She had done her homework. "Why me?" he asked finally, not because he didn't know, but because it was the kind of question that stripped away the noise. Her voice softened. "Because you're the one person who understood what we were actually acquiring, and the only one who didn't need a podium to prove it." That was the moment it became clear. This wasn't a favor. It was a correction. The universe, realigning itself after a season of arrogance. Marcus negotiated terms over the next 48 hours with the same precision he used in his code. No bluster, no ego, just quiet, exact language. He requested equity, not stock options, equity. He asked for limited hours and full IP review authority across any expansion into adjacent markets. He even included a clause that allowed him to walk at will, penalty-free if certain integrity standards weren't met. And they said yes. To everything, because it wasn't just about acquiring a product anymore. It was about securing the architect before someone else did. Meanwhile, the board upstairs was still performing CPR on Brent's credibility, trying to reverse the damage without admitting they'd let a peacock run quality control on a jet engine. No press release mentioned the pause. No internal memo acknowledged the shift in leverage. But everyone in the loop knew the truth. Marcus Wolf wasn't just back in the room. He'd redrawn the room around himself. I ran into him in the parking lot the day the final agreement came through. He was carrying a box of old tech books and his favorite keyboard. No fanfare, no security escort, just one man walking out under his own power. "You leaving?" I asked. He nodded. "They want to fly me to San Francisco next week." I smiled. "You going?" "Yeah," he said, setting the box in his trunk. "But just for the coffee. The rest I'll handle remotely." He wasn't bragging. He didn't need to. The offer spoke louder than any press release. Because when you've built the foundation, you don't need to raise your voice, you just name your terms. And watch the skyline move. The memo hit inboxes at 7:12 a.m. on a Thursday. Subject line, leadership transition and strategic realignment. That's corporate for somebody just got torched. In exactly 4 paragraphs, the company spun Brent's removal into a necessary pivot to ensure continuity in a rapidly evolving deal environment. No names were mentioned, but you didn't need a decoder ring. Everyone with a badge and a brain knew who it was about. Brent Walsh was no longer on the deal. No more briefings, no more meetings. His Slack account blinked offline sometime before sunrise, and his badge access was flagged for temporary hold pending internal review. Rumor was he'd tried to blame legal, then engineering, then even me, as if someone in communications had masterminded an IP compliance clause 3 years ago just to make him look bad. But you can't blame gravity for falling off a cliff you sprinted toward. He was given an executive reassignment workspace, which was just a nice way of saying he was now working out of a conference room with no windows, no meetings, and no purpose. Meanwhile, the real work resumed, but under new rules. At the buyer's request, read, demand, a new clause was inserted into the acquisition agreement. It was short, precise, surgical. No transfer of assets shall proceed unless accompanied by written, dated confirmation from the originating IP custodian of record. 1 sentence, 16 words. But the shift it signaled was tectonic, because buried in that clause was the acknowledgement that Marcus Wolf was not just a former employee or a technical advisor. He was the lock and the key. The buyer's counsel insisted on making it a standing requirement. Not just for this deal, but for any subsequent mergers involving the acquired product. It was subtle, almost polite, but every attorney who saw it knew the subtext. Never again will someone like Brent be allowed to bulldoze through innovation without accountability. And Marcus? He didn't gloat. He didn't post cryptic messages on social media or email snide one-liners to the executive team. He just submitted a copy of the signed clause to his attorney, who filed it under his permanent archive with the note, licensing terms honored, authorization non-exclusive, revocable with cause. I did overhear one thing, though. A mid-level manager, one of Brent's former cronies, muttered in the break room that the whole thing was an overreaction, just a bunch of paperwork. Another guy, one of our old school sysadmins who rarely spoke above a whisper, replied, "Funny thing about paperwork, it's only invisible to people who don't read." The temperature in the room dropped 5 degrees. They knew. They all knew. We weren't just a product line anymore. We were a lesson. Marcus never came back after that. His office was quietly cleared, his nameplate removed. Not ceremoniously, just gone. But in the updated training docs, in the onboarding slide decks, in every IP compliance review that followed, one new phrase appeared again and again. Verify originating author approval before initiating asset sale. It didn't have his name on it, but it didn't need to. It was his fingerprint, left on the glass, quiet and undeniable. Because the best revenge doesn't make noise. It rewrites the rules so the next guy never forgets where the power really lives. The deal closed quietly. No champagne this time, no press event. Just a handful of calendar cancellations, a flurry of legal countersignatures, and a last-minute insertion that looked harmless to the outside world, but carried the weight of 1,000 grudges wrapped in legal precision. Marcus's IP was carved out. Not transferred, not merged, licensed, independently, under a non-exclusive limited use agreement that required annual renewal, oversight, and a compliance review with one specific stipulation. All legacy frameworks built on the Wolf integration shell shall be governed under separate licensing managed by the originating author. In short, they got the house, but Marcus kept the foundation. The acquirer's CTO personally signed the license memo, and the check that followed was, well, let's just say it had a comma count that would have made a hedge fund manager blush. But it wasn't about the money. Not for Marcus. The payout was just a receipt. Proof that silence, when engineered correctly, makes the loudest noise. Brent was gone before Monday. No farewell email, no LinkedIn post. Just an empty desk and a deleted profile from the org chart. HR spun it as a strategic exit during a realignment phase. Internally, we knew he'd been let go under Clause 17B, failure to maintain fiduciary diligence during active acquisition. Translation: You cost us millions, Brent. His parking spot was reassigned before the ink dried, but my favorite part: the new organizational chart posted to the buyer's internal portal. Tucked beneath technical licensing and IP oversight, there it was. Legacy IP licensing led by M. Wolf. Contracted external advisory role. No title inflation, no photo, just a name, a position, and a fact. He didn't need a desk to cast a shadow. The day the final package arrived, I happened to be over at Marcus's house. He'd offered to lend me his soldering iron for a side project. We were standing in his garage, the kind of place where everything had a label and not a single wire was out of place. The mailbox flag was up. Inside was the envelope. Thick, cream-colored, embossed seal. He didn't even open it right away. Just held it, nodded once, then handed it to me while he adjusted the torque on a socket wrench like it was any other Thursday. "Can you sign this for me?" I joked. He smirked and finally slit the envelope open, reading the first page silently. His eyes moved slow, deliberate. Then he pulled out the signature form, uncapped a pen, and signed it with that steady hand of his. No hesitation. He tucked it back in, sealed the return envelope, and handed it to me without ceremony. "Drop that off for me, would you?" That was it. No speech, no grand moment. Just a man closing a loop he started writing half a decade ago in silence, while everyone else fought over the right to speak louder. As I walked back to my car, I glanced back at him. He was wiping down a socket set like it was a meditation. And I thought about all the boardrooms, all the backslaps, all the smirks Brent had thrown his way. Funny thing about pay grades. Turns out, they don't apply to owners.